So I just copy and paste this basically.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
You good?
About to post it right now. G. Sorry, I'm in a hotel, so the Wi-Fi is kind of suspect.
Hey, you're all good. I have those issues every now and then at my house because it's a lot running on one Wi-Fi. So
All right, cool. I'm good.
welcome, guys, to another Prowler podcast. Today, we're excited to have a guest joining us, Joel Harrison. Joel is currently an assistant women's basketball coach at Appalachian State, and he comes with a very good background because he's been all the way from the NAIA level to now the D1 level, but he's also had stops at a D2 school and another Division One school that I'm not sure, but we'll probably get into West Georgia, which went through a transition. I'm not sure at the time you were there, but he's going to bring a lot of valuable advice, especially for athletes trying to navigate the current landscape of recruiting, as we all know, has changed dramatically in the last 5 years due to the transfer portal and due to NIL now, also at the D1 level specifically. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Joel where he can give a brief background of himself, and then we'll jump into the first segment.
Yeah, for sure. First off, thanks so much for having me. Been looking forward to this all day. So excited to be on. But like you said, Joel Harrison from Montgomery, Alabama, just completed my 8th year coaching, going into year 9, all at the collegiate level. Went to Faulkner University as an undergrad, was a student manager actually on the men's side, started out in men's basketball, jumped into women's basketball as a graduate assistant there at Faulkner. Did that for a year and then was promoted to full-time assistant, was the full-time assistant coach there for 3 additional years at the NAIA level, then got a job at the University of West Florida as the assistant coach there, NCAA Division II school in Pensacola, Florida. Did that for 3 years. Got a job at the University of West Georgia, which I was at, the most recent over the last year over in Carrollton, Georgia, which was going, from a Division II to Division I transition. So I was a part of that in the Ascent conference. So did that for a year, and then have been at App State now a month. So brand new to the spot, but really excited to be here. Great university, got a lot of good things going on, and just really excited to be, at this mid-major level now.
No, that's awesome, man. And got a lot of good background for sure. So can't wait to hear what you got to offer. But, I always start off, especially with coaches, is, what led you to want to be a coach?
Well, my dad was actually a high school coach. So he actually started the basketball program at my high school. So growing up, like, it's one of those things, like, you're always around it. So, I played pretty much my whole life up through high school. And of course, once my dad started coaching, I was around it all the time and just always had a passion for the game, really enjoyed it. Never really saw coaching to be in my future. Honestly, I was actually pretty adamant that I was never going to coach, but it's just something I had a passion for and was always around it. And, I was pretty realistic with myself. Like, I knew college basketball, like, wasn't in the cards for me, but I wanted to still be involved with the sport in whatever way I could be. So, my coach at the time, Jim Sanderson, who, kind of started all this off there at Faulkner University, offered me a student manager spot there at Faulkner for the men's program. And I got to know him because I'm from Montgomery, where Faulkner is. So I went to his camps from literally like age 11 to 17. So just kind of grew up in that gym, got to know him. He got to know me. He offered me a student manager spot. I did that, and the rest was kind of history, just being in the program every day, learning the ins and outs, how to coach, how to recruit, how to game plan, how to practice prep, like just really learning all the behind the scenes of, a college program and how to do this thing. It really sparked an interest, in me to say, hey, this might be something that I want to pursue. I love the game. I love, mentoring young people. And then we went through a coaching change 3 years in, and his brother, Scott Sanderson, actually came in and took over. And, just through that transition, my passion kind of grew even more. And then, once I graduated with my undergrad, decided to pursue coaching. And like I said, got a GA job. And uh, on the women's side, which I thought once again, would never happen, but the rest was history. It kind of took off from there. One thing led to another, built some connections. And here I am at App State, 9 years later. So it's been a whirlwind, but it's been good.
No, that's awesome, man. The least the things you least expect always come true, right?
For sure, for
That's why
sure.
that's why I tell athletes, when guiding them through this process, even if it's in a high school, don't ever close the door because you never know where you could get from there, right?
Absolutely.
Actually, I don't know if you know him, but we had the Pittsburgh MLB scout that started off at Faulkner, Brandon Rimbert, on the podcast,
Okay.
about 8 months ago, and he started
Yeah,
off at high school and ended up at a Division I school, and now in the MLB doing something else, not playing, but he's still very heavily part of it. So
for sure.
you never know where that journey could take you, right? So,
Absolutely.
but we're going to jump into the first segment and about the trust factor, experience versus upside. And the reason I like to talk about this, especially with a Division I coach, is because the transfer portal is evolving constantly, right? And the first question I want to pitch to you is: do you trust a portal player more than a high school recruit when it comes to being game ready nowadays?
I think that question is very subjective, and I'll explain why. Because, like, obviously, the transfer portal has been a hot topic. I mean, you hear about it, it's here to stay, it's not going anywhere. No matter how any of us feel about it, the transfer portal is here to stay because the numbers grow yearly. I think for me personally, to answer your question, like kind of which way do I lean and which one do I trust? I don't really know if it's more of like a trust thing, but like I think it really just kind of boils down to what your program values. So prime example, like there are coaches out there that will only recruit transfer portal kids. Like they want older kids, more experience. They've been there, done that. They don't have to worry about the freshman transition, the learning curve, the being away from mom the first time. Like they don't have to worry about that. You're getting a kid that you have, a year, 2 year, 3 years, sometimes even 4 years worth of college tape on. There's really no guessing. You just have to take that player and adapt them to your system. So there's that coach. There's other coaches that kind of prefer high school kids. They want to mold them. They want to teach them, their system. They want to build a culture around those kids. They want to try to have them around for a couple of years and then just build a foundation, based off of that. I've worked for coaches on both sides. I think for me personally, like I personally like a mix. I think there's value in a mix of, having some young kids on your roster that you can mold and, kind of bring up through your program to build some continuity so you're not having to recruit a brand new team every year. But I also think there is some value in, recruiting those transfer players where, you take a lot of the guessing game out. You pretty much know who they are. You know what they're capable of. Like I said, they got a couple years of tape under their belt. They've got experience at, whatever level they come from. And you pretty much know walking in the door what they can bring to your program. So, like I said, I don't know for me personally, I don't know if it's a thing of whether I kind of trust one more than the other, but I think there's value in both. And I think the one thing that the transfer portal has done and has shown is, you can turn your roster over pretty quickly and, you can turn yourself from mediocre to successful, overnight. You've seen that, in some programs where a coach might leave the program and all the players leave, or, you might walk into a situation where the previous, coaching staff may have had a roster that wasn't that talented. You come in, recruit your kids, bring your kids in, and now all of a sudden a team that was, in the bottom half in the league is competing for the conference championship the next year. So like, it's really kind of taken out, some of the, hey, bring in a crew of 8 freshmen, and by the time they're juniors and seniors, then you'll start to kind of see, them grow and, develop and that sort of thing. And you'll have some success kind of 2, 3, 4 years down the line, in a culture where, we want instant success and we all want to win now. That's what the transfer portal has allowed to happen is you can really turn your roster over, relatively quickly and, have some quote unquote instant success by, bringing in experienced players.
No, you're absolutely correct. And you look at the dynamics of the transfer portal, how they, kind of push some coaches out the door, right?
For
But
sure.
you look at women's basketball. Gene up at UConn, he's dabbled a little bit in the portal, but he's still heavy on development, right? And he's
For
talked
sure.
and spoken on that. And actually, I was up in Indianapolis watching one of my men's guys in high school play basketball, and Gene was at the bar that I was at the Westin.
Okay.
And I was overhearing his conversation, and he was talking about this to these people is, you know, when you bring in a player that's fresh out of high school, you get to leave your handprint on them, right? A,
For
trans-
sure.
a transfer portal athlete, you don't get to do that, right?
For sure.
They've already kind of been created into what they're going to be. Um, so, there's pros and cons, just like you spoke on. And I think that's a heavy hitter for a lot of people to realize nowadays is if you don't get that D1 recognition out of high school, the portal is there and coaches live heavily in it. And
Absolutely.
a lot of players give up hope because they see that D1 is the only way to success, right? Well, the landscape has totally changed nowadays. And as we've seen, and a lot of coaches breathe heavy in it. I mean, you talk about people buying into the transfer portal to create success. Well, Bruce Pearl has fully done that in men's basketball at Auburn.
Absolutely.
So it's a prime example. So, kind of diving more into that, and you kind of hit on it, but when you are forming a roster each year, are you more comfortable of having more high school athletes or, other athletes just had about 1 or 2 years under the belt?
Yeah, I think when I recruit and when I'm trying to, put the program that I'm affiliated with at that time in a position to win, I think it's more so based on, what does it take to win your conference? What does the rest of your conference look like? Because ultimately, whoever is at the top of your conference, that kind of dictates like what you have to go get to beat them. So, in a climate today where, like you said, the transfer portal, numbers are up every year and kids are transferring left and right, that sort of thing. For the most part, the best kids in the majority of conferences are going to be older, more experienced kids, and the majority of those are transfers. So like your best kids are going to walk in the door and like help you like really bring them home. More times than not in every case obviously, but more times than not those are probably going to be transfer kids. So I think as far as like when I'm building my roster, like I said, I kind of like a mix just so like you're not having to turn your roster over every year, because I think that's tough to just try to, build, a
Team
culture
chemistry.
and team chemistry and that sort of thing. Like that's just a challenge. So I think there's value in, having some young kids that you can bring in and develop, and they kind of, like you said, you can put your handprint on them, and you can have them, for however long they're there, whether that be a year, 2 years, 3 years, or if they stay with you for 4 years, which we're starting to see. That's starting to get rare. But if you're the lucky coach and you can get them for 4 years, that's amazing. But ultimately, Arkansas State was the team that won the Sun Belt on the women's side last year, and went on to the NCAA tournament. They won the Sun Belt tournament. So if you look at their roster, they've got, a roster full of transfers. So we know at App State, if we want to go compete for that top spot, which is what we're trying to go get, we've got to go get kids that can walk in the door and help us do that. And we don't have 2-3 years to wait on that. Like we want to do that now. So those impact kids are probably going to be older, more experienced kids that have kind of been there, done that at whatever, college level they've been at, that can walk in the door and help you compete, for championships kind of, out the gate.
No, for sure. And then, another little dynamic that, has evolved really in the recent years, the JUCO eligibility ruling, right?
For sure.
And how do you depict that when you're recruiting a player? Because now, if you go get a kid out of JUCO, it's not, D1 ball, of course. JUCO is a little bit different. It's a lot more grinding than a lot of university and colleges because it's a JUCO, right? But now you get 4 more years after they've already played 2 years. Have you seen more coaches kind of lean that way now?
Yeah, so that ruling specifically is like still up for vote, so that hasn't been passed just yet. Now we're all speculating, at if that happens, kind of what does that mean? Because I think that changes the game a lot, because if that ruling goes through and players that go JUCO are basically able to play JUCO for a year or two and that not count towards your eligibility. Now you're looking at JUCO almost becoming like the G League, to where like, okay, you're a high school kid, you might not get that Division I opportunity that you may want to desire out of the gate. But now, you go JUCO, which JUCO is that's kind of been what JUCO has been designed to be. But like if you're able to get all your eligibility back, now I think JUCO becomes more attractive because those fringe, okay, I might be a fringe D1 kid, like I might be getting flirted with a couple low majors and that sort of thing, but I'm probably more of a D2 NAI level kid, but I really wanted to, chase that. I'm going to go JUCO. I'm going to go develop for 2 years, and I'm going to develop by playing, not being on the end of somebody's bench and just practicing every day. I'm going to go actually play, put up some stats, develop at the college level against other junior college competition, and then make myself more marketable for that, whatever opportunity that I'm chasing down the line. So like I said, it kind of almost becomes a G League type deal in that scenario. So like I said, we're still waiting on the ruling for that. That hasn't officially been passed yet, but if it does, like that will change the game, I think, pretty significantly. And once again, just like the transfer portal, that will impact high school kids the most. But I do think it opens doors for high school kids to be able to, develop by playing versus just, kind of rotting on. I don't want to say rotting, but sitting on the end of somebody's bench for a couple of years and quote unquote waiting your turn,
Mm-hmm.
and potentially losing a year just because you had to wait and develop and grow and that sort of thing. You can go play 2 years of JUCO, develop by playing on the floor, and then go play 4 more years after that. So very very interesting thought in concept there. Like I said, we're waiting to see if that's passed, but if it does, it's going to be pretty significant for
Yeah,
sure.
no, it's going to be game changing. And, there's another rumor that's floating around with it, with speculation, of course, but there's supposedly it could include any outside of the NCAA. So that
Yeah,
would include NAIA, right?
for sure. Yeah, yeah,
Then you look at that dynamic. If a player does go NAIA, let's say they're a late bloomer, they don't evolve all the way into their sophomore, junior season, which we see quite often.
yeah.
Um, Now you get a player that's played possibly 4 years, got his bachelor's, which looks even more appealing in the transfer portal typically because a grad transfer is, very highly liked in a lot of ways nowadays. And, coming out of NAIA school now and you coach at NAIA school, do you see that kind of also, if that is included as well, making a big gateway for NAIA schools to be more appealing as
Well,
well?
absolutely. Now, I think for NAIA schools, it probably won't be in the way that they would necessarily want because you're going to have kids that are going to come to you with the intentions of, I'm going to come here, do a couple years, develop, and try to move on. So, I mean, that will obviously be a factor. But I do think that it would make the level a little more appealing because, like I said about the JUCO, like, um, I think NAI is one of those things. It's a sleeping giant. Like it's not in your face every day. Like, and of course, we see the NCAA on TV. So, like, if you're not familiar with NAI, like, you don't really know what it is. But if you've been there, it's high level basketball. But if you're in a situation where, once again, you can go play and develop against college level competition and then not count against your eligibility, you can make yourself more marketable for whatever level that you're chasing down the line, whether that be, D1, D2, like whatever that looks like. I think it puts NAI once again in a situation where it's like G League. Like, now the thing that the NCAA will have to regulate with that because, I mean, you don't have an unlimited clock, right? Like at some point you're going to run out of like playing eligibility. So of course, what does that look like? 2 year school versus 4 year school. What is the actual clock? Is it 5 years of eligibility? Is it 4? Like, what does that look like? Of course, there's a lot of variables with that. But once again, if that changes as well, that's game changing for the NAI level also.
No, for sure. And it'll be interesting if NAIA gives a response back, because they don't really have a transfer portal like the NCAA level, right?
For sure.
You're
Yeah.
athlete there, you can't transfer out the next year and play for another NAIA school. Now, if you leave out of there, you go to the NCAA level, that's different. They have different rulings because you're entering the NCAA, right? So it'd be definitely interesting to see how that evolves and, what the official ruling looks like. And because the NCAA doesn't, nothing shocks me anymore with with what they pass, right?
Absolutely.
So I mean, just like I think it was last summer they released that you don't have to sign up a letter of intent until I think midsummer now almost. So that changes a lot of dynamic as well, because you get an athlete that can pull, flip in the middle of the summer after you already kind of had him on
For
campus.
sure.
So,
Yep.
but jumping to segment two is evaluating the risk, pretty much what we've been talking about of the long term versus quick fix, and just dive more deeper, because I feel like high school sports is being diminished due to the transfer portal, right? And a lot of kids are giving up hope due to that. Um, and do you kind of see that becoming more undervalued due to the immediate impact of these players having at the high level, or do you think like these mid-major schools, like maybe App State, um, can still benefit from going to get high school athletes still?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's talent at, every level. And I mean, for the high school kids, like my advice to any high school kid that would listen is, hey guys, like, yes, the transfer portal is a thing. Yes, it's not going away. Yes, like it looks like, opportunities do get slim because there are a lot of programs out there that, value the more experienced kid. But my challenge to high school kids is to be a little more open-minded and don't look down on the lower levels. Like, I think this is prime opportunity for high school kids that, may not get the D1, offer that they may have always dreamed that they get. Okay, you don't get that, but there's still good basketball out there. This is an opportunity for you to look into D2, D3, NAIA, JUCO. There's other levels out there that are really good basketball and really high levels. And I just think high school kids have to be a little more open minded and not shut out, the levels that you might not see on TV, but we'd be willing to do the research to figure out what those are. Because I'll tell you, like I've been at NAIA and I've been at D2, and I mean, there's high level players at every level. Like I think they kind of get slept on because they're not in your face, but yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, what's your ultimate goal? If it's to get a college scholarship, it doesn't matter if that's D1 or NAI. If you're getting your school paid for, that's a unique opportunity that so few kids get. And ultimately, I always challenge kids like, don't chase level, like chase fit. Like, because yeah, you might go D1 and be miserable. That might not be the best fit for you, because the thing about it is like the D1 level versus like D2 and NAI, like D2 and NAI and D3 even are like designed for just some of the for you to have life balance, like especially D2. Like D2's whole motto is like the player like athletic and life balance. Like they pride themselves on that. Like that's a big part of the pitch to go D2, because you have your summers to yourself. Like, you don't have those summer workouts. Obviously, you have your hours and stuff that you're, practicing and lifting weights and doing film and all that stuff is the same, but it's not the year-round grind that D1 is when you're, on campus during the summer and, you're doing, workouts and, you're doing summer school and like all that stuff is mandatory. Like our kids have to be there for that. So my response to that is like I said, just be a little more open-minded, be willing to do the research and look into some different levels, because I think there's opportunities out there despite how the transfer portal, feels as far as taking some opportunities away. I think opportunities might just look a little different than, what you may have dreamed as a 6-year-old. But I think at the end of the day, like I said, if you're playing college sports and getting your school paid for, ultimately that should be the end goal.
No, absolutely. And I like to hit on this too. When you talk about the transfer portal, it's beneficial, right? And a lot of players think if they go D1, if they don't pan out, they can hop in the portal right after it. That's all correct, but we just seen in the past portal, roughly 23% have now found a home. The rest have not, and that was out
For
of
sure.
roughly 8,000, I think, in the men's, and roughly 6,000 in the women. So just because the transfer portal is there, I tell athletes all the time, be cautious, because just because you think you're not in the right fit, you don't want to be left in that portal, because you can end up slipping very quickly, because the portal goes like this, as we all know. At snap of a finger, people get picked up and coaches are filling rosters and they shut the door. Um, so I tell athletes all the time, be very cautious and don't, go to that lower level instead to grind a couple of years, or go JUCO or go NAIA, because you never know what opportunity can present itself afterwards, right? Kind of like you've been talking about. So, you know, we talk more about high school players, and a lot of coaches, I know like Coach Calipari at the men's level breathes heavy on this, is waiting on development of players. He had a prom player this year out of Memphis, Billy Richmond. Nobody thought he would have the impact he did, but he took March Madness by storm this year. 18-year-old freshman, and he even talked about, that's why he takes chances still on these freshman players because, as we know, Calipari for years, he's always been known for that one and done coach, right?
For
Players come
sure.
in,
Yeah,
and he's still living by that. And I think that a prime example of players to realize is look at the Billy Richmond story, and never think that door can be shut because he's now presenting himself. So what do you think about that? Waiting on development of a player for it, to the right time presents itself.
yeah. I mean, once again, I think it just depends on the kid. I mean, and you don't really know how a kid is going to adapt to college sports until they get on your campus. Recruiting is a little bit of a guessing game. Like, yes, you're recruiting kids that fit your system and fit the things that you want to accomplish and fill the voids on your roster and that sort of thing. But the biggest difference in college basketball versus high school is the physicality, the speed of the game, and just the grind of it all. The season is longer, the grind is longer, like your weight workouts are more, like your hours are longer, like the dedication to it is more. So like you don't really know how a kid is going to adapt to that until they're in it. But at the same time, like if a kid is talented enough, like and they can help you win, you're gonna play that kid. Like it doesn't matter who they are. If they're 18-year-old, freshman kid that can walk in the door and help us win, like they're gonna be on the floor. But that's not the case for everybody, and that's one thing. Like I think kids have to be really careful as far as like comparing looking at other situations and then like kind of comparing that to them. Like you have to run your own race. Like not every freshman kid walks in the door and is ready to contribute right away, and if that's not the case, that's fine. Like we've kind of created a culture where the expectation is for every freshman to play 40 minutes a game right away. And like that's just not realistic for every kid. Yes, you're going to have those kids that can do that. They're going to be all freshmen, level players. They're going to be on a freshman team, leading scorers, that sort of thing. Yes, you have those. But if you like zoom out and look at the grand scheme of the landscape, that is not the majority. Like it takes kids time to adapt because the game is just so different. Like the physicality, the speed of it, like it takes time. And sometimes it takes years. It might take a kid 2 years to kind of get their groove and figure some things out. It might take them 3 years. They might not figure it out till year four. But ultimately, as long as you run your own race, stick with it, don't compare your situation to others, and just grind and work, I think ultimately you'll get out of it what you want. But like I said, you can't just walk in the door and expect to be every freshman to get the keys from day one and play 40 minutes and that sort of thing, just because that's not the reality for every kid, and that's completely fine.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that because a lot of athletes nowadays expect the keys when they walk in the door, kind of, and the coach that we had on, Monica Maxwell from high school, she even hit on it is due to the portal the way it is now, she feels like a lot of players are losing that passion, that grind, because
Yeah,
players don't have to grind for so long now anymore. They can hop from school to school,
for
to get
sure.
an opportunity because they're getting beat out by another player. They're not pushing themselves to the next level. And I feel like that's hurting, sports across the board because we don't see that competitiveness anymore, right?
For
Um,
sure.
and I feel like that, we saw that prime example in March Madness this year, especially on the men's side, is it wasn't as equal as it used to be, right? There
For
wasn't as
sure.
many sets. The margin of losses were, a lot larger than they've ever been, and that's due to players hopping from school to school until they get that right fit, and they've balanced out all the Power Four schools in the conferences. So I feel like that's, what she said spoke heavy and is it very true to the fact because players need to kind of retain that competitiveness because that makes you better in the long run.
For
Makes
sure.
you better
Absolutely.
well. So shifting to our last kind of segment for this podcast is, specifically on shifting recruiting strategies, which a lot of coaches have had to do the past 2 to 3 years specifically. And so I wanted to ask you, have you changed in any way or, the way you build your roster compared to the, let's say 2 to 3 years ago?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, really before COVID, the transfer portal like was the transfer portal kind of really got started like around like the COVID time. So like before that, it really wasn't. I mean, it wasn't a thing. So like, back then, you're making calls to see who might be transferring, but the rules were different at that time because in order to transfer, you had to sit out. To if you're transferring from another NCAA school, you had to sit out a year, and that sort of thing. It used to be 2 years and it was one, and now obviously you don't have to sit out at all. COVID happens, and kids get the extra COVID year, and of course that creates an extra year of eligibility for everybody that played during that time. So kids getting kind of 5 years of eligibility, to where now it's the COVID kids that kind of played their way out, but you're still seeing kids playing at two, three, four schools. Whereas, there was a time period where if a kid went to four schools, you're like, all right, like what the heck is wrong with them? Like, are they a problem child or whatever? But like that's honestly kind of become part of it. And like every case of kids transferring is not a bad case. Like, there are the occasional ones that are out there, bouncing around, chasing checks and kind of running from the competition. But, I am one of the coaches, like, I do believe there are some good reasons to transfer. Like, if you go through a coaching change and the coach that recruited you to that school leaves, I don't have a problem with you, leaving schools and kind of, figuring something out. If you're a grad transfer and you graduate and fulfill your undergrad, duties to that school and you want to look for other opportunities after you graduate, like I don't have a problem with that personally. So like as far as like my personal strategy, I don't really know if it's changed. I just have tried to adapt with the times and be a little more open-minded to, okay, not look at, okay, this kid is transferred two times, like next, versus, okay, really dig in and try to figure out exactly, what's going on. Because I've coached kids that have been at multiple schools and they've been great kids and I've had great experiences with them, and they weren't the problem children just because they bounced to a couple of different schools. So like I've just tried to be a little more open minded and take it more of a case by case basis. Kind of take each kid for in their situation for what it is, and just determine, are they a good fit for what we're trying to accomplish, and do they fit the culture, and can they help us win games, and are they a good fit, and great academically and that sort of thing. So I've just tried to really adapt more to times, versus kind of just change my strategy, because ultimately you know the type of kids that can help you win, the system that you're recruiting to, so that doesn't change. It's just a matter of the landscape kind of changing and us as coaches being flexible enough to accept it for what it is, and move forward accordingly.
No, for sure. And talking about the transfer portal, and we've hit on it a lot tonight because it's a heavy topic right now, and I've heard a lot of talks or disgruntles about no loyalty to a program anymore, especially when you're throwing this amount of money at them. And there's been a lot of talks that the White House is possibly going to make an executive order, to limit and return some loyalty to a program. And I kind of hope that does happen, because if these universities and programs are throwing all this money at a player, they should have some respect, accountability to retain that player for at least a contract term. Because just like the NFL, WNBA, NBA, you all have to retain a contract for a certain amount of time.
Absolutely.
And do you see the NCAA possibly making a ruling due to all that speculation now, to possibly put in a limit of how many times you can transfer?
I Can they? Yes. Will they? I don't know. And that's where it gets dicey, because like what this whole NIL thing was supposed to be, like the name, image, and likeness itself, in its origins is, players to get compensated for their name, image, and likeness. Prime example, if, star player at UConn, let's just say Paige Beckers, who is one of the best players in the country,
Yep.
if her jersey is in the UConn bookstore as a number 5, well, it doesn't have her name on it, but we all know whose jersey that is. The jersey is selling out. She should be compensated for that.
Yep.
If your face is up on a billboard and, they're advertising the basketball program with your face on it, you should be compensated for that. Like, I have no problem with that. I think where it gets dicey is when you start bringing in outside money that's technically not affiliated with the universities, which in our current landscape, there is no salary cap. So if you're, you know, multi-billionaire guy that graduated from X school and just have a passion for athletics and just have money to blow because you're passionate about the university and want to see your school succeed, you can throw however much money at that situation as you want to get the kids that you want. That's where I think it gets dicey, because this was never supposed to be pay for play, and it's technically not, because it's not the schools that are paying you. But when you're bringing outside money in, there's no regulations on that. So it's like, okay, like, where's the balance here? because obviously the big schools that have unlimited resources and money, they're always going to benefit. But and I'm not saying it should be equal across the board. Like I don't necessarily like agree with that, but I think the NCAA is going to have to figure out something along the lines of a salary cap of some sort. Because like pro sports, I mean, obviously we know they're multimillionaires, but they have a salary cap. Like you can't just go give a guy unlimited amounts of money. Like, at some point, you have to, essentially move within like a budget of, the level of whatever your school is at. And I think until that happens, I think there's going to continue to be parity, like, in this kind of thing. It's really interesting. But that to me is the biggest thing the NCAA has to do is develop some type of salary cap. And I think naturally the trickle down from that, some of this will kind of take care of itself, honestly.
No, I totally agree, and you're exactly right. NIL was meant for your name, image, likeness. Whatever's got your name or your face on it was supposed to be what you're getting compensated for, not how much Coca-Cola can give you money for being on a commercial, et cetera, right? And I feel like that's the portion that's got out of hand because yes, players should be paid compensated for whatever they're presenting to the university, right? However, they're advertising and bringing attention to the university because that brings in more revenue.
For
As
sure.
in women's basketball, Caitlin Clark put Iowa on the map, like never before, right? And
Absolutely.
that's a prime example that she should have been, compensated as she was, for what she brought to that university and all the revenue she brought. So that's a prime example. But I think as far as these schools, and we've seen it dramatically change the Power Four conference landscape with a realignment and everything. Is a lot of these conferences, which is why the Pac-12 kind of diminished to what it is now. Is all these conferences are making a super mega conference now
For sure.
because whatever school has the most money to buy in and offer the capabilities. And as we see, the Big 10, Big 12, and SEC is ruling majority of college sports nowadays because of the money they can offer, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's what's diminishing, college sports as we used to know it, because college sports is meant to be competitive across the board. That's why Appalachian State back in the day, that's why they beat Michigan that year.
Absolutely, yeah.
That brought a lot of attention to just the university itself that benefited all the programs, right? So I think that's kind of the missing piece that we need to the NCAA needs to return kind of or get it as equal as they can back to normal. It's all fine for the players to make money, but I think the NCAA has really got to find some boundaries because I think they rolled it out completely out of just open the floodgates, and now there's no really way to backtrack because everybody all the players are liking where it is now. So.
For sure. Yeah, backtracking is not going to be an option. We've opened this can. I just think we have to restructure it to kind of fit more of what it was originally supposed to be. Once again, like I don't have a problem with kids being compensated. Like if you're marketable, if you're, the running back at USC and a car dealership puts you on a commercial because you're marketable and they can sell more cars, I don't have a problem with that. I think the thing that does not get understood is like those opportunities are like this much of the country. So like I think we've kind of created a culture to where like everybody's kind of expecting that, and that's just not the reality. Like there's levels to this. Like, the top kids at the top programs are probably going to be the more marketable kids in the country. That's not to say that kids at lower levels can't make money, because they can. I think it's just going to look different. But at the same time, like I said, you might be lucky to have a multi-billionaire donor that went to your school that can just funnel you tons of money. And like I said, not that I think it should be a fair across the board, but like I think there has to be a cap on it. Like there can't just be like name your price. Like that to me is where it gets dicey, because it takes, college sports, the focus of it is supposed to be, the sport itself. This has become how much money can you pay me versus, I'm getting a great opportunity to go represent this university, play the sport that I've played my entire life, and, represent the school and get an education while doing it. The education is taking a back seat because there was a time where the scholarship was the prize. Now the scholarship is almost an afterthought. It's okay, the scholarship is cool, but this is my avenue to make some money. So what can you pay me? And that's where I think it's kind of gotten dicey. And it's going to take some people with some guts to put their foot down and really make some regulations on this stuff. like I said, it's never going to be normal again. We've opened this can, but I just think we have to kind of channel it in more of a controlled fashion, whatever that looks like.
No, for sure. And I think, there's slowly more people stepping up. It's going to take a lot more than now. But I think a lot of people are seeing that there's more players expecting a paycheck now. They're realizing what the college experience is truly for.
For sure.
And, because there's no dream really to play professional sports anymore, because in all professional sports, we see players can make more money at college than,
Absolutely.
sitting on the bench in the NFL or the NBA or the WNBA or the MLB even. Um, and the professional sports are liking the dynamics because they get more experienced players out of the draft each year. But it's also hurting them because they're not getting players until they're 25, 26 possibly, right?
Yeah.
And that a lot of professional teams don't want that, because that gives them 7 to 8 years typically on average to play a sport at the high level. Now, where it used to be like 11 to 12. So I think it's a big thing. But another thing I want to hit on before we get into our spotlight tonight is, probing has been a big thing in the media also lately. And I think this is another thing that NCAA has got to think about, because I have no problem with, a coach, contacting a player just to see where their mindset is at with the portal coming up. But when you're contacting them and pitching them, hey, we can give you this certain amount of money if you come here, and that kind of promises, and we've seen it, that those promises even fall through in some scenarios when they do get there, because they just used it as advertisement. Do you think there needs to be, some limitations around maybe the coach can't contact the player until he officially announces his portal entrance?
Well, that's the rule. I mean, you're not supposed to,
Correct.
reach out. That's the rule. Now, how do you police that?
Sure.
That's $1 million question. And I've had that conversation with a lot of coaches. Like, now, I err on the side of, like, I'm gonna apply by the rules. Like, I'm not gonna go poach a kid that's on a roster that's I'm just not gonna do that. But we all know that there's coaches out there that do it and don't hide it and are honestly public about it. So what does that look like? I honestly think there should be some type of punishment for that. Whether there's a finding system or something like along those lines, because, like, I mean, you think about it, like, we're putting in all this work to build a roster and build our culture and build this team camaraderie just to have you know X school come in and swoop in and take my kid because she paid them more. Like,
Mhm.
that to me is where we've gotten a little away from what this experience is supposed to be. And honestly, I think that's taking advantage of kids, and I'm not okay with that. I don't have the answers as far as, like, what that should look like. And obviously, like, and it's like anything, like, how do you police that? Because all in those situations, those are underground conversations. That could be a DM, that could be a phone call through an AAU coach, that the AAU coach is maybe having that conversation with the kid. So, like, there's some gray area and there's some ways around it. I hate that it's gotten to a point to where that has become as big of a thing as it is. Um, and unfortunately, that's another thing I don't think is going to go away. Like you said, I mean, you've seen it in sports, like, you know, the players that can ball at the lower levels, like the bigger schools see that. And, like, obviously they want to win too. Now, instead of going getting their own kids, they're going to come and try to take, ours at our level. And it's unfortunate that it's come to that. But, I don't really know what that looks like. But, me personally in our program, we follow the rules. To me, I always say the day that I have to go recruit somebody off of another team and bribe them, like, that's the day I got to get out, because I'm
Yep.
just not built like that. I've still got some morals, and I want to do things the right way. And it's unfortunate that it's come to that. But yeah, the rule is technically you're not supposed to reach out to a kid until they officially enter the transfer portal. So
No, that's absolutely correct. But yeah, as you said, that they're no heart. A
for
lot of
sure,
coaches are not following it, and they're not shying away from tweeting it out. The next day, hey, so and so is committing before they even announce it in some
for
cases, right?
sure,
And I think that's it's hard in college sports across the board, because these are also kids. At the end of the day, and these kids don't know when they see dollar signs. That's all they're thinking about, and as we both know, when we were 18, 19, 20, we were getting $1 million thrown at us when we were
uh,
19.
for sure.
I can, I'm not going to say yes, right? So, it's an interesting dynamic, but I I'm very challenged by the NCAA's mindset because we see in professional sports when a player wants to be traded, they can announce it, right? But
Yeah.
it's up to the front office to make that trade happen. They can sit out, but then there's stipulations they can lose a certain amount of their paycheck, right? We've seen it plenty of times across a lot of sports at the professional level, and to typically get a player to transfer or to sign them in free agency, let's say, they always have to go through the agent, right? And a lot of these schools nowadays at Division One level have a compliance officer that manages the NIL. And I think you can speak to more of this. Is I feel like the NCAA should put some stipulation in that there has to be a contact to the compliance officer or some kind of agent of that player or organization or school before they can directly make contact with a player.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, I think that goes back into, I mean, the rule is, in order to contact a player, like they have to go through the process through compliance. Hey, first off, tell the coach, hey, I'm looking to transfer this and that. We have the conversation. They go to compliance, notify compliance, like, hey, I want to transfer. You have to fill out the paperwork, do all that. And then you have to have, people sign off on it for you to officially, be in the transfer portal. Once you're in the transfer portal, you're a free agent. At that point, you can do what you want, and I have no problem with that. Um, to me, like as long as you're following the proper protocol, like I don't have a problem with it. And honestly, like I know like there's some controversy and different coaches feel different ways about, should players be able to transfer as freely as they can right now. I can see a lot of different sides of it. Like I can see why coaches get frustrated at it, but I mean, I always look back to the side of like if we want to bounce around, we can. Like there's nothing that holds us back from doing that. So, it's hard for me to look a player in the eye and say like, obviously I want to keep my kids around, the kids that I recruit in my program, like I want them to finish out with us. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's what we bring them there with the intention to do. But I mean, it's hard for me to look at a kid and say like, you know, be mad at, how do we lock a kid in for 4 years when we as coaches can bounce around as freely as we want? Like there is, a balance to that. So to me, as long as you're going about the process the right way and going around, like I don't really have a problem with it. As long as you go through the proper channels and, go through the process the right way, actually enter the portal. And like I said, once you do that, you're a free agent. To me, is I have a problem when you start getting into the backdoor deals and the handshake agreements and the DMs and the gray areas and the bribes, and that to me is where it gets dicey because ultimately you're taking advantage of the kid. You're dangling the carrot out in front of a kid that honestly they just see dollar signs, but they don't fully know. I mean, and unfortunately, there's a lot of bad advice, floating around here from coaches and mentors and agents that just either may not know or see this as an opportunity or kind of see this as their ticket. Obviously agents are making a cut off of that, so they might see it as an opportunity for themselves. And I just never want to take advantage of the kid because ultimately like that's not fair to them. And that's not what this is about. Like college sports is supposed to be to give these kids an opportunity to better themselves for their future. It's not supposed to be dangling the carrot of a dollar sign to get them to come to your school so you can benefit and win more games so you can bounce. Like,
Yep.
yes, that's part of it, but let's do it the right way. Let's not just throw a
Right.
bag at them and, kind of blind them a little bit and get them to come so we can take advantage of them. So I just always want to err on doing things the right way, kind of regardless of what the climate looks like. Like, that's what we're going to do. And that's what we kind of pride ourselves on.
No, that's awesome, and I hope a lot of coaches listen to what you just said because that's the way coaches should mindset is because you want to we go back to you want to mature these kids because a lot of players are not going to play professional sports, and you
Yeah,
want to make
absolutely.
the best young professional, no matter man or woman, in the workplace because a lot of players that are used to be college athletes are some of the best people in the workforce because
For
they
sure.
built on work ethics throughout college, right? You wake up at a
Absolutely.
certain time and you don't go to sleep at a certain time because you have schoolwork outside of your sports. And I feel like that is, diminished a lot, especially at the top of the level of D1 sports. So, Jumping into the prowler spotlight, and we'll keep this short, is the top 1%, as we keep preaching on, the Power Four conferences have benefited the most from the transfer portal. So
Mm-hmm.
speaking of that, is App State is a mid-major school and program. Have you seen that hurt you guys, or benefit because y'all found a process around it, possibly?
Well, our staff is new, so like I'm the newest on the staff, but the rest of our coaches have only been in App State for a year. And they've all, been at Division 1, but just different levels and that sort of thing. So in our program, like we're still trying to navigate that a little bit and figure out like what does that look like for us because we are all so new. So we're trying to, currently figure out, what does the recipe of success look like for us in this recruiting landscape that is changing daily. Um, Obviously it goes without saying, the Power Four schools that have the most money, like they're gonna have, first dibs on who they want. That just kind of is what it is. There's really not much way around that. Our challenge for us is, to find those kids that are, still good enough. Like we want to win games. We get paid to do that. We have to win to keep our jobs. Like we still want to do that. But like, what are those kids that, kind of fall through the cracks or, maybe, we get ourselves to a point where I think we have a lot of good things to sell. So like, how do we market that to these kids so that they're attracted to come to our school and help us win games and, put our program on the map and that sort of thing. So we're still trying to develop some of that. And we talk about it daily as far as what that looks like for us. Like I said, the big dogs kind of have first dibs, but there, as we know with the portal, there's still kids out there. You just have to go find them. I mean, you
Yep.
just got to put in the work. You got to watch the film. You just got to go find them. And, we take a lot of pride in the work that we do to find the kids that we have. We bring in really talented kids in our program. And, we want those kids that are honestly good enough to play at that level, but may fall to our level for whatever reason, because ultimately those are the kids that you're going to bring into your program and help you win, at the highest level. So it's a daily changing thing that, like I said, we're still trying to figure out.
No, for sure. And a big thing for these mid-major schools, and we've seen it, is that retention. Because once your player blows up on the charts, you better believe that UConn and them is going to be knock on that door to see how they can get them in their doorstep, because they've seen the potential they can produce. Now, can they produce that against the top of the level, right?
For
So
sure.
that's a big thing that I got buddies that I played college football with that are coaching at mid-major schools in football. Got guys that I played with that play basketball alongside me in college athletics that are facing the same thing at mid-majors, is kind of used as a farm ground more nowadays than what it used to be. And I think that's just the new normal, right? Is you're going to have to persuade these players, hey, do you want to always have a spot, or do you want to, possibly go up there and lose a spot, and then you're going back in the portal, and you never know where you're going to shake out to be. So
For sure. And
I think
that's why I think finding the right fit is so important on the front end. Like, don't get caught up in level. Like, don't get caught up in the shiny new toys. Like, if you're good enough to play at that level, by all means do that. But that's not the reality for everybody. For the majority, you're not going to play on the big time. So, what does that look like for you? What's more important? Do you want to go sit on the end of a Power Four bench just to say you did that? You can do that, but you didn't play. Or do you want to maybe go to a mid major or a low major or a D2, actually get on the floor, contribute, have a good experience, and be able to tell your kids one day, hey, I actually played and contributed to success, whatever that looks like. Find the fit that, fits you the best. Find the coaching staff that fits you the best and can, coach you and teach you and mold you. One thing you talked about as far as like that retention, that's something that we talked a lot about, like how do we, keep our kids in our program? To me, that goes into the relationship building. And that's one thing that I think it's unfortunate that money has become what it has, because I think ultimately that's the thing that's taken the biggest hit is the relationship building between the player and coach. Like, because it's become a little more, not for us, but it's become more transactional versus, hey, like I'm bringing you here because ultimately I want to mentor you. Like I want to help you grow into a, productive member of society so that, when you play out however long you're in this program and you go into the workforce, like you said, when you're sitting across an employer and they're interviewing you, it's a no-brainer that they're going to hire you for their company because, you're a college athlete. You're used to, being a team player, working with others, working a strict schedule, timeliness of things. Like that's what we really pride ourselves on in our program, and all our players know and our recruits know that we brought in. Like relationships are everything for us. We want to be open and honest. We want you to be open and honest with us, and we want to build on the front end, and we want to continue that. It's not, hey, you scored 30 points a game, so I've got all the time in the world for you. So into the bench, kid, like I'll see you when I see you. Like it's the relationship goes one through, we'll have 12 on our roster, 1 through 12. So, but like I said, going into the original point of, finding the right fit for you, but establish a relationship with the coaches that have your best interest in mind. Because ultimately, those are the ones I think that will have the most success in the long run and will have, the most enjoyable experiences, playing college sports, whatever that looks like.
No, that's for sure, man. And I go back to the story, and there's plenty of stories across the board, but there's players from every level each year that get drafted, and it depends on that legacy you created. And just because you're at a Division I low level school doesn't mean you can't be the next big star at the WNBA level, right?
For
And
sure.
we see players all the time that make impact at all professional levels that are from some of the smallest schools, right? So that's why I tell athletes never shy away from any of these smaller programs because you could develop into what you want to be, and
For sure.
teams will see that. So
Absolutely.
hitting on our prowler question of the day that we always have is, and today is how has the transfer portal NIL most impacted the programs you've been at, like West Georgia and App State, and the options we have is increased roster turnover and instability, which is a huge thing we've already hit on. Harder to retain and develop talent, as we know, is a big topic for mid majors, and recruiting shifted more towards the portal as we hit, and then minimal impact. Have you seen so far?
Yeah, the schools that I've been a part of, it's all kind of been different, but I mean, it's definitely impacted. I mean, anytime I think you bring money into the equation, like that's gonna change things because, anytime you can offer a kid, money to come to your school, kind of whatever that looks like, that's gonna make you maybe more or less attractive to a kid, if they have bigger offers or lower offers or kind of whatever that looks like. I think what it's forced us as coaches to really do is be adaptable. Like, this is not the day and time where you recruit a kid since they were in the eighth grade and you've known them for 5 years and you build a relationship with them and you pretty much know when they graduate they're coming to your school because you built a relationship with them for 5 years. You know, I think what it's kind of changed from a recruiting landscape is like, obviously, the 2026 class is the next high school class up. So yes, like we're building our list of 26s and we're going to tournaments and we're doing that. But at the same time, like we still got to finish our roster for next year. So like until like not to say that we're not looking ahead, but like there was a time where you could look 2, 3, 4 years down the line and like really start to kind of get a head start on things. Not to say you can't do that, but I think some of that has shifted to where the here and now because ultimately like those kids that you might have interest in that are 2, 3, 4 years down the line, if they blow up too much and kind of build themselves to a point to where they're maybe above your level, you might not get them. Maybe they get offered more money at a higher level or like whatever that looks like. So yeah, you're building your list, but there's no guarantees that you'll really get that kid because like I said, it's become a little more transactional versus relational, which is unfortunate. But like I said, we got to adapt. That is what it is. So the programs that I've been a part of, we just try to do the best that we can, by the kids, try to, like I said, build relationships on the front end, make sure we're getting the best culture kids that we can. Obviously scholarship money is a factor. Obviously, NIL stuff, that stuff is a factor, but I don't want you to come to my school because of that. Like, I want you to come to school because of the experience that you feel like you can get here. Because if money is the focus, then at some point, like you're gonna be unhappy and it's just not gonna go well. Versus if you're getting money, or maybe you're not. Everybody on the roster is not getting money. Like that might be a thing as well. But if you're getting money to any capacity, and you're at my school because you genuinely want to be here, I think we'll all benefit and we'll all have a better experience. Because of it, because we're doing this thing. ultimately for the right reasons, and we have the same goals in mind.
No, that's for sure. And you kind of hit on it. Another thing is a lot of coaches are having to shift a lot because you can't look at that two-year out process, right? Because there's a constant revolving door with development, and if they develop in the right ways, they can easily elevate themselves. And another thing is, while you're out recruiting, you also have to continue to recruit your current players because if
Absolutely.
if they feel left out, they could pop in the portal the next day, pretty much,
Absolutely.
and then you're having to fill another roster spot maybe a month before your season starts. And we've seen that happen a couple times. So it's a constant revolving door, and it's an interesting topic that is taking college sports by storm, as we all know it. So, and our weekly quote this week, and I can't. Don Staley from South Carolina couldn't said it better. Is I think the portal is much like social media. It's the fad that just keeps continuing. It is out of hand. It is absolutely is. I don't know how you can control it, as we both spoke on, but it's a student athlete's way of continuing their own destinies. So I think that hits home because it speaks to the student athlete.
For
And
sure.
you want to control your own destiny and create your own legacy. So with that being said, do you have any closing remarks, Joel, for anybody?
No, I was gonna say no. This has been great. I hope I was able to, share some advice that somebody can, pick up on. Just in this ever-changing recruiting cycle. Like ultimately, if you grind and work hard and do what you're supposed to do, and if you're good enough, like you'll be found. Like I said, I think my closing remark is my biggest thing is just be open-minded. Like don't limit yourself. Don't shy away any opportunity. Keep the main thing the main thing. Ultimately, to play college sports is a unique opportunity that not a lot of kids get. And, if you can do that and get your school paid for and have a great experience, let that be the ultimate goal. Don't shut out, maybe smaller schools or the lower levels just because, you may not have heard of them or that sort of thing, because there's good basketball everywhere. There's good sports at every level. And, it's such a select few that get a chance to even play, college sports. I was not one of them. I didn't play college sports at all. And, I was able to work myself into a position where I can, give those opportunities to kids that earn those. So just be open-minded and continue to adapt with the times. And ultimately, if you work hard and, grind and do what you're supposed to do, the right coaches will see you and, you'll get your opportunities.
For sure. And I think, the story of you not playing college sports is even more beneficial for, these college coaches are looking for avenue because they didn't get to play college sports. Well, here's avenue. And if you work hard, you will get recognized as a coach as well to get to that level as well. And we see
For
constantly,
sure.
even the coaching dynamics. I think even though we talk to heavy on athletes, I think a lot of young coaches can benefit from this podcast as well, from hearing your experience and how you got to where you are. So I think that's also beneficial for people that will watch this podcast is if they're young coaches to navigate the way you have. So I thank you for that. And thank you for coming on and sharing, man. And it's been good. So, and thank you everyone for tuning in to the Prowler podcast. We're always excited to continue to expand our own awareness with, current players, coaches, and, past players and coaches as well. And if you're always serious about, recruiting, always feel free to hit our platform up on X, IG, Facebook, or anything. And as always, stay connected, stay driven, keep pushing towards your dreams, and we can't wait to see what's next until next time. And as always, Prowler up, guys. Awesome, man.
Perfect.
And I'll post it on X, Instagram, and everything tonight.